Transformative Principle, episode 91 with Piper Riddle. Welcome to the Transformative Principle, where we learn how to be an amazing educational leader from real educational leaders. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. Thank you so much for listening. Today we're doing part 2 of my interview with Piper Riddle, principal of Draper Elementary in Utah. And today we're going to talk about instruction at her school and how she focuses and works with her teachers and how she knows good instruction is taking place. As you know, she's in a dual immersion school where half the day is in Mandarin, half the day is in English, and she really has a good way of making sure she knows when good things are happening in her school. And I think that it's a really cool, neat way to look at things. So enjoy this conversation. What I want to talk about now is the actual learning that's happening in your school. We've had a lot of pressure over the last few years to be really good at teaching kids, and Common Core has come, and new state assessments and new teacher evaluation systems. We've got a lot of pressure on teachers now, and your English-speaking teachers have been here through all of this and probably feel that pressure a lot. How do you deal with the idea that they're essentially still being held responsible for the learning of their kids when they're not seeing the kids for half the day, and what impact that has on them?
Okay. I think I first need to really quickly explain again the content division. So first, second, and third grade, math teacher is the target language teacher, in our case Chinese, and then the English-speaking teacher is in charge of English language arts, as far as, tested areas, if you will. And then in fourth and fifth grade, I think that's where that burden really does lie. Because math becomes more abstract and less language rich, our state opts to move that content over to the English partner, meaning that in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, the target language teacher teaches Chinese literacy and science, and the English language teacher teaches English language arts, math, and social studies. And so I think that's probably where the burden lies, because in the primary grades, it really is pretty evenly divided. And when we have our data meetings, I see equal intention between both teachers, certainly in the area that they are responsible for. But in language arts, I'm going to backtrack for a second. In language arts, they do take both responsibility. And that's been fascinating. It's something that we realized beginning of last year that previously during English language art data conversations and problem solving, the Chinese language teacher would kind of be not as involved in the conversation. And then it occurred to us that there's a lot to comprehension skills and strategies and themes, building those funds of knowledge for students that could be across both languages. And so our teachers have been more intentional working together, that if in English language arts, they're working on author's purpose or main idea or summarizing, that then in the Chinese literacy classroom, they are working on those same skills, but in the target language. And so that's been really cool to watch, because that was a teacher idea, and to watch then teachers come together and more passionately be involved in language arts, because there is more commonality than when we first realized. So that helps then to share that burden. So primary grades, not so much of an issue. In grades 4 or 5, it does become more complicated. In the state of Utah, in fourth and fifth grade, our state testing is for English language arts, math, and science. And so the science becomes the primary responsibility of the Chinese language teacher, but that leaves the burden of English language arts and math proficiency largely on the English teacher. Again, the target language does support with about 20 to 30 minutes of additional instruction in the language in math. But that initial understanding and building that proficiency does lie with the English teacher. And I'm not sure I could articulate really how to mitigate that burden. I think, one, you do have to acknowledge it and then provide whatever supports and resources teachers identify that would help with that. For example, supplemental programs for homework or for practice opportunities, like software programs. An example, we use MobyMax as a supplemental program for additional supports at home, or in practice stations at school. And that helps kids to build fluency and automaticity. Reflex Math is another program that focuses then on student computation skills, freeing up then instructional time for building, depth of knowledge and more complicated thinking, because kids are able to work individually on computation with computers. And I think then too, that constant dialogue. So again, our 4th and 5th grade teachers meet every Friday as partner teachers and discuss what standards and concepts they're teaching the next week, and looking at weekly assessment, formative assessment data, and sharing that with each other. And for example, if in math, the English teacher is saying, our kids, pardon me, they wouldn't say my kids, they would say our kids are really having a hard time with fractions and conceptualizing that, then the target language teacher discusses ways that they could emphasize that in their supportive role and help partner with that challenge that kids are having. The interesting thing is when those scores then are published, I see the whole school celebrating everyone, because that's the reality, that whether you were specifically responsible for that content area, it really does take the efforts and work of everyone in the building for students to be successful. And so I think that's just important too, to acknowledge that everyone plays a role in that. And with that said, when there's not as much success as one would hope for, that same thing, that the blame, if you will, is distributed appropriately as well, that we don't allow any one educator to feel that they're alone in supporting student achievement, because it really does. It takes my efforts as the administrator, and even how I allocate resources and instructional aides or interventionists, as well as how I support the classroom environment and certainly the skills of the classroom teacher. With that said, the interesting thing, there's an HR element there too. Jethro, I apologize to interrupt you. I'm afraid I forget this piece, that I do have to be really purposeful in making that assignment, because if I can be candid about that, I think you might understand, not every teacher is well suited for that position.
Yeah, that is definitely correct. And that's something that we have to pay attention to. And you can't just put someone in a position and say, oh, you've been trained as an educator, so you're good to go on this. There are a lot of other things that they need to have and be able to do. And I think especially at your school, where there are many opportunities for them to possibly to have challenges that they may not have at another school. And what you're doing is actually working, because your school was recently, the SAGE, which is the state test scores, were released for this last school year, and your school was ranked in the top 25 in math, which is a really great accomplishment, especially considering that the people who are teaching your students math are teaching that in Chinese, and they're able to score well on a state test that is in English. The next thing I'd like to ask is, how do you ensure that good instruction is taking place when you're not speaking the target language that is in the classroom?
Well, I have to highly rely on my observational skills of, just watching. So, in the dual immersion family, if you will, it's commonly said that if you walk into the classroom and you don't know the language, but you can't ascertain within, 10 to 15 minutes what's being taught, that should be a red flag. While, when I first heard that, it seemed like a lofty goal. It's true that our most effective teachers, I can bring anyone into their classroom, and not knowing the language, and we're able to step back out and ask them, so what do you think they're teaching? And they're able to identify that. And that's a sign that the instruction is explicit, and that the students in that room, regardless of where they're at with their language proficiency, are able to access the academic knowledge. And so that's really important. When it comes to kind of those discrete skills that as a district we observe and calculate, there's a better word, tally, like opportunities to respond or feedback. I watch carefully the interaction between teacher and students. And honestly, those are easier to identify. When it comes to quality, though, of feedback, or another area that we pay attention to is, depth of knowledge and, the rigor of the questioning, for example. So I can identify when a question's being asked, and even sometimes the complexity of the question. If the student responds with a one word answer, it was likely DOK 1, maybe 2. Where if the student responds with several sentences, then it likely was a more complex question. So I do, all the formative observations feel really confident in. Even the summative, I feel like I have a good sense of what's going on and able to identify that. But I also just want to acknowledge that I do really appreciate when people from the state office will come and visit and do observations, and we'll do observational rounds together. They are speakers of Mandarin, and so we will go and observe together and then debrief afterwards. And it's a really great way for me to be able to continue to calibrate myself with those who are understanding the language. And I learn a lot through those experiences. So while I know I have lots of room to continue to improve in my observation and support of the target language classroom, I feel like that gets better every time I'm able to interact with people from the state office. And now we even have a coordinator in our district level who speaks Mandarin. And those are great opportunities for me to learn and to go deeper with that, if you will.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that you had people come do walkthroughs with you that did speak Mandarin. So I think that's a good support for you to make sure that you understand what's actually happening. In your English-speaking classrooms, how does your feedback different to your Mandarin-speaking teachers and your English-speaking teachers?
Well, in language instruction, one of the basic tenets and critical facets of language instruction is that we elicit a lot of output from students. And that output includes, both speaking and writing, but largely speaking, especially in the first, the primary grades. And the great thing is that really coincides. I remember, years ago going to professional development on highly effective language teaching. And I thought, well, this is just good instruction on steroids, that this is what we want all classrooms to have. Lots of opportunities to respond, quality discussions, a clear sense of whether or not students understand, because of course that would be critical as you build language comprehension. So the nice thing is that I don't find that we are supporting the two classrooms so differently, because those high priority instructional skills that we've identified as a district really are across the two languages. And what's, I think, really fantastic, because as a building, I'm sure like yours, we do a lot of instructional rounds with our teachers where they go and observe their peers and give feedback, and observe that some of our target language classrooms have been identified, by myself and by the peer group as just amazing models of explicit instruction, of creating opportunities to respond, and that pacing piece too, because, to increase opportunities to respond, sometimes that means that we also need to have just that appropriate pacing where it's not the stand and deliver. And our language teachers, because that's what they have to do, they tend to develop a fluency with that more readily, if you will. And then that's something that all of our teachers are able to see and then want to implement even better in their classrooms.
Yeah, fascinating. Can a normal principal just walk in and be a principal in a dual immersion school? Can a normal teacher just walk in and be a teacher in a dual immersion school? Or is there something additional that you need to be successful in that?
The answer is yes, although, a normal principal, aren't we all crazy? So I'm not sure that that's a correct qualifier, but...
Good point. Good point.
Yes. I think it helps, though, to develop a basic understanding of the principles of effective immersion programs. We do have 9 assurances from the state, also called non-negotiables, tenets of the program that, when followed with fidelity, we know leads to really fantastic outcomes for kids, but not all of them are comfortable. So I think it's really important for an administrator or a teacher going into an immersion program to know and understand those, and to be able to commit to thinking in creative ways to
problem solve issues when they come up as they try to protect. I think it helps too to just have a passion for second language learning. Gratefully, my own children have a value for that as well. And I think that helps carry me when things do become difficult. And I think, boy, it'd be easy if this were just a traditional school without a specialized program within. And yet I don't have to walk too far to then enter a classroom and see the amazing things that kids are doing. I can't imagine if I didn't have that belief and passion for that sometimes those challenges would be overwhelming and maybe defeating.
Yeah, I've learned a ton from you today. I always learn a ton whenever I talk to you. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me. My last question that I ask every principal is, what is one thing that someone can start doing this week to be a transformative principal like you?
Mm-hmm. That's a really big question, Jethro. First, assuming that I'm transformative, but
not assuming, knowing, don't you worry.
I think something that could be done this week is listen. It's really easy to get caught up in the daily doing of the principalship. And yet I know that when I don't take the time to listen to my kids, listen to teachers, listen to parents, and that means I need to be present and to be around the building and make myself available. And that our outcomes are far greater, and my ability to build relationships, which I think is key to success, in this work that we do. I can't do that when I stop listening. And sometimes that listening part is hard. We hear things that maybe are uncomfortable, but I think it's just critical that I continue to have an open door to my office, that I'm often outside of my office and out and about, and people feel like they can approach me and give feedback, and then I listen and respond to that feedback. So listening is a great place to start.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jethro.
Thank you so much for listening to this interview. I learned a ton, and I hope that you take what you've heard and apply it to your life, especially that piece about listening. It is so vital and so important that we are listening to the people who are talking to us and working together to help find ways to solve problems. If you wouldn't mind, if you learned something from this podcast, take a minute and answer the survey question at the end, which is asking you, what are the challenges that you're facing? What's something that you're struggling with? And if you would take a minute and just answer that question, I'd love to be able to find people who can help you with your specific issues. I do read every one of those, and I will reply back to you if you leave your email address and start a dialogue with you. So thank you for listening to Transformative Principal. I'm Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.